Hello everyone, and welcome to webinar 31, which is on the health department, everybody's absolute favorite subject. I was actually surprised when I went back through and looked to see if we had done one on the health department that we had not. I know that we've talked about it quite a bit, I know that we've shared experiences, but we have not done a full webinar on it, and I felt like that was a needed item. So we're going to be doing that today and touching on a few different things, and really the focus of today is how to think, how to work with, and how to get what you want. And really what you want and getting your way is two totally different things. I think a lot of times people will approach the health department in a way that they are trying to get their way, or that they throw a tantrum and think that that somehow will help them, and it will not. So ultimately the goal of this is to focus on the health department, to know that there probably will be some changes that they require of you and that there are reasons for that, and to do what they ask, and if you go through that and you bite your lip and you do it with a smile on your face, it makes all the difference in the world. And we'll go through and we'll talk about some specifics on that. Now, one of the first things that I wanted to touch on was that health departments vary by county. So here is a map of all of the counties in the United States, and you can see here in Salt Lake, our counties are much more spread out and much larger on the western portion of the United States than you poor buggers over here. But you have a lot of counties, and each and every one of these normally has their own health department. So if you are doing a certain area of business, well, you have to register with each and every one of those. There's a way to approach each of those, and here it's a little bit different, because like in Utah, I will mostly do business in Salt Lake County. I have about 80% of my events, and then eventually I have events that go out of that. And so what I'll do is I will approach the health department and I'll get an annual permit for Salt Lake County, and I will function under that permit. They will usually inspect all of my stands, they'll tag them, and then I never have to do it again. As soon as it's done, I can have mobile stands. They can go to each and every one of the events that I do, and when the health department shows up at the event, they see that it's tagged, they make sure that I'm functioning like I should, and done. Now, if I go to another area, you go to a county that's just adjacent to yours, then you have to register with their health department, and you have to get a permit from them. So I would actually go and do a racetrack, and I would have to work with that health department as well. But I would only get a temporary. There's no reason for me to chase an annual permit unless I'm continually and repeatedly doing business in that area. Sometimes I will be, sometimes I won't. But if I know I only have a few events out there, then sometimes it's more worth it to pay a little bit more and get just a temporary permit. They're not asking to see my stands beforehand. They're not doing any of that stuff. I tell them basically what I have. They're okay with it. Usually the restrictions are far less, and they're going to show up at the event and they'll inspect my equipment just like they would if I had an annual. And if I'm not complying with stuff, they will shut me down. So I have to still be doing what they want me to do, but there's a lot of things that I don't necessarily have to go through, and hoops that I don't have to jump through if I'm not doing a permanent permit for the year with them. And usually those temporary permits last for a few days. So if you're doing a small fair or something like that where you have a few days at that event, well, you can get a temporary, or even multiple if you're going to bump those back to back and do a fair that, say, lasts for 15 days. Anyway, so my point of this is you don't necessarily have to get an annual permit in every county. Now, if you are doing a bus and you're driving through neighborhoods and you need to register with each and every county, and you're doing that all summer long, you will want to do that. Get inspected and get passed and have a permit for every county that you're doing business in. That's just something that you'll have to go through and is necessary, unfortunately, but it's the reality. You can see that each and every one of these is different. I'm going to bring up an example in a little bit of something that I did in an area that's one of the hardest to pass in the nation. Now, I won't be specific about where that is, but I will tell you that the hardest areas in the nation are Nevada, California, and Arizona. And I went to one of these areas to get a building to pass. I was doing a business with a cousin of mine. They wanted to get into the business. I told them I'd come down and help them. And quite frankly, I was actually excited to go to one of the hardest areas in the United States to pass the health department, to see what that challenge was and to get through it. We have a lot of people that will call us and they'll have a stand and they're trying to make that happen. And so we're working with the health department, working with them. We're trying to make those things happen. But things are different when you're in person. And anyway, I will share with you an experience here shortly and maybe go out to one of our stands to discuss that so that you're able to see the equipment that I'm talking about and what they asked me to do. So that brings me to another topic. And that is, I have all the time where people will have stands and they're trying to pass them through the health department, and I'll have it where they have not yet purchased their stand, but they obviously don't want to purchase a stand until they know it's going to pass the health department. They don't want to make that purchase and then find out, I can't even do business because this did not pass. So really the primary goal of Snowie is to have our stands pass a great majority of all of these counties. We often use the phrase that we pass in the hardest part of the nation so that it is easier to pass in the rest of them. So 90% of those counties out there will pass the kiosk without any question whatsoever, or the building, or the car, or whatever it is in its intended purpose. And we do that because we comply with the hardest areas in the nation. And as you will see from my experience, that always doesn't play out, and I'll explain that a little further later as well. But you will always notice that about 90% of these counties that you see here will pass our stand without any question. Very, very easy. And then you have 10% of these counties that are populated, that are popular, and they are very difficult to pass. And it doesn't necessarily have to do with how the stand is built, with the equipment that's inside. It has to do with everything, with the hoops and the boundaries that they put up. And in my opinion, they put those things up so that they are able to weed the field, to see those people who are wanting to do business with them and who they want to do business with. That's where biting your lip and putting a smile on your face comes into play, because I truly believe they do test that. They pay attention to who they want to do business with, because you will constantly be doing business with them. And they will always be doing it with you. And if it's going to be someone who is going to provide a headache for them every time they communicate with them, quite frankly, I think they would just rather not do business with you. So remember that. Then I often get the question asked, is it better for me with the health department to already have my stand or to provide drawings before I buy my stand? Now obviously, if you already own a stand, there's your answer. Use your stand, take it, and do your best with that. If you do not already own your stand, it is a very good idea to do drawings. It's a double-edged sword. There are pluses and minuses to both. If you have a stand and you take it to them, very often they will look at that stand and they will say, okay, look, it obviously is nice. It's built very well. It's very close to compliance, if it was like somehow out of compliance a little bit. And they will let those things go through. Sometimes, and especially if you're cool to them, they will let those things go through. If you are not cool to them, they will take every little thing and they will point it out, and you'll have to change and comply. And it isn't always whether you're cool with them or not, because sometimes they will do it anyway. And as you will hear from my experience, I was extremely nice to them. I bit my lip, I didn't bark back, I didn't do anything, and they still put me through a ringer like you wouldn't believe. So it doesn't always necessarily mean just by having your stand it's going to be easier. Sometimes it is, sometimes it's not. Now with drawings, obviously you don't want to buy a stand, and that's everybody's concern. I don't want to buy a stand, I don't want to buy a bus and put it in an area where it's not going to pass in the end. So it's very good for you to know that before. So we will give you drawings. An example of that would be let's see, I have some drawings here, and we'll send you something like this. So this is a drawing for an 8-foot building, and it goes through and it talks about some of the specs that we have, and we have multiple pages that will go through and describe different things that we do. And I can send those to you, and then you can take those to your health department and pitch them. And it gives them a very good idea of your water supply, of your lines, and all that stuff to be able to do that. So know that those are there. The problem is when you take just documents beforehand, now you don't have them saying, hey, they already have a stand here, let's just push them through. They now have the freedom to make you comply with every rule that they have. And so sometimes it can be a little more difficult like that, because they will say, hey, they have the ability to change whatever they want on this, let's make them comply, and now you change everything about it. But just because you have drawings doesn't mean that they're going to do that to you. They could look at those drawings and be like, look, this is already manufactured like this, let's let them pass. That could also happen that way as well. It really all depends on the county. Every county is different, and you just need to learn to comply, bite your lip, and do the things that they ask. The one thing that I tell myself is they are always right. One thing that I tie this to is school. In our family, we're extremely entrepreneurial. We've done many different businesses within our family. Almost all of us do shaved ice, and I'm the baby of 9, so there are 9 children, and quite literally our parents would say, have a trade, have a profession to fall back on. Other than that, go and do whatever you want. And we've always used that freedom and have done and experimented with a lot of things. And so school, for some of us, has been difficult, because we would go to school and feel like we were wasting time. But having that trade and having that profession, sometimes school is a part of that foundation that they wanted us to have. And so that was one of the avenues that I took. I got an IT degree, but it was difficult. During that time, I wanted to be doing all of these other things. I had ideas. I had things that I wanted to do and wanted to try, and I had other things that were vying for my attention. I remember my mom saying, just get the paper. Because I remember going to school and I said, I am learning very little. I'm not sure why I'm even here. And I remember my mom, who was very much involved in education. She was a principal for years, many different schools, retired as a principal, was a teacher for many, many years. She loved education. And so coming from her and saying, Aaron, just get the paper, was actually a heavy phrase for me. It meant a lot. Here was a woman who valued education heavily, but she saw that I was struggling and I felt like I wasn't getting any value from it, and she was, get the paper. Do what they ask, do what you need to do, and move on. And I've always been grateful that I did that. And I carry that into the health department. Just do what you do, get the paper, move on, because your real goal is to make money and to be open. If you're too busy fighting with them and arguing about how ridiculous they are sometimes, well, guess what? You're not going to open, and you've just lost your whole objective. So get the paper and move on. Just understand that they are always right. And I know that can be frustrating for people, and that bucks against some people's personality like crazy. But the reality is, they are always right. They are the authority. The second you question them, the second you struggle with that, it is not going to do you any favors. So now I'm going to run outside and I'm going to hop in a kiosk so we can discuss this a little bit more. So this is a kiosk, an 8-foot kiosk, and it is the same as the building as far as the water system is concerned. Really, our 8-foot building and our kiosk is exactly the same, except the building has windows that enclose this area, and it also has an air conditioner on top. And the kiosk does not have windows, and it has these telescoping poles on each end that allow it to drop for easy towing and less wind resistance. But other than that, they're the same. So I had a building in this other area, and they needed to inspect it. So I set up an appointment, I went to them, and I told them that my sink was 4.5 inches, and which I thought was actually the regulation, and the regulation was 5. And if you actually pull a tape and put that in there, this thing will actually measure out at 5 inches. I actually had another person after following all of this story, that another person that inspected that said, that's 5 inches. So I couldn't believe it, but it was one more thing to bite my lip about. But so going back to that, so I'm there and they say, well, okay, if this is 4.5 inches, you need to find either one of those that's 5 inches deep, which proved difficult, and or what they wanted me to do after that is they said, okay, I want you to disable this sink completely, and then we want you to get this sink. Let me get a better angle here. His tires are in here with me. And they wanted me to remove this sink and remove the divisions. So now instead of having a wash, rinse, and sanitize, which is very nice and almost every health department in the nation wants you to have, they said, we want you to take that out and we want a sink basically with the same inside dimensions, same depth, but without the divisions. So now I needed to find a sink that would fit that whole area. And I thought, okay, that shouldn't be too difficult. And for some reason they want me to disconnect that, but I'll do it. So I started, and this is day 1. So for the rest of that day, I looked, I called, I went everywhere to see if I could get a sink that would fit that. And I could not find one. So the next morning I ended up going to a restaurant supply company. I talked to them about their sinks, and they had huge sinks. They didn't have anything either that would fit that. And so in the end I ended up asking if I could use one of their warming pans. I came out and I disconnected this and I dropped in a warming pan that literally was the exact same dimensions as these 4 corners, and it dropped in perfectly and had almost the exact same depth. And I thought, holy cow, I'm going to do this. Now remember, a warming pan doesn't taper like a sink. It doesn't go towards the drain. And if you look in these drains, everything, this metal all tapers in, and then it also is recessed. So all of the water that gathers here all makes their way into it and eventually down the drain. Now in a warming pan, it's perfectly flat, and it does not taper towards the center at all, nor is it recessed where you're going to put this drain. So I thought there's nothing else I can do, so I ended up drilling the center of that warming pan out, and they didn't have any bits that would properly cut through stainless, and so I bought 2 bits and I rented a drill from Home Depot because the people that I was working with there didn't have any tools, and so I rented a tool there, and right over one of their garbage cans I eventually melted my way through that warming pan, and I put in a drain. So I took out one of these and I reassembled it on it, and with all of that, with all these items, there's a gasket under here and all of that, this ended up sitting about 1/8 of an inch up off the bottom of the warming pan. And so I thought, man, it's flat and I'm 1/8 of an inch above, they're never going to pass this thing. So I ended up taking it back to them that afternoon. I had an appointment with them, and I showed up and they said, okay, turn it on. So I pulled out my extension cord and ran it to their building, and they said, no, you can't plug that into our building. And I thought, well, that's how I get my power. They said, well, you need to show that you can be self-sufficient, that you can provide power on your own. And I said to them, well, I'm not actually setting up at an area that would require a generator. I'm setting up in an area that is going to let me plug in, like I'm at a mall and have power being run to the building. They said, we don't care, you need to provide your own power. So I said, okay, I can run to Home Depot real quick and rent and come back. And they said, no, you need to set up another appointment. So I set up another appointment for the next day. So now I'm 3 days into this, and I rented a generator, go to them the next morning with an appointment, and I started up off the generator. I run my water, fearing that they're going to deny it, and I disconnected my hand washing sink, and they ran water and they said, you pass. And in my mind I thought, you gotta be kidding me. You guys just took a perfectly functioning, perfectly good water system that had a separate hand washing sink that you thought was off by 1/2 of an inch, and a 3-basin utility sink that obviously is extremely useful. I put in a warming pan that's flat, left stagnant water 1/8 of an inch or more in the bottom of it, and you just passed it because all you wanted was your specs. And And obviously I didn't say that to them. I bit my lip and I said, thank you very much. And I moved on. Which really, that is my point, is I think this example illustrates more that what they want is to know that they can work with somebody who is going to jump through their hoops. I honestly believe that they put hoops in place to see who is going to work with them and who ultimately they want to work with. Now there were about 10 scenarios in this where I just wanted to scream, but I didn't. I bit my lip. I said, okay, I'll do whatever you want me to do. And it was difficult, but I did it, and I got it there, and I got them to approve it, and I was in business. Really, the ultimate goal is what? To be up and running and to make money. The goal isn't to make a point to the health department that they just approved something that was far worse than what we had originally. Now, another thing that I wanted to illustrate is that there's nothing that Snowie could have done to accommodate that. Now, we could be able to get a sink and things like that, but they didn't have any specs that even resembled anything like that in their paperwork anyway. But if they did, if they said, okay, we don't want a separate hand washing sink, we just want a large basin, well, we would be able to accommodate that, and we would be able to find much easier through ordering a way of being able to do that than I was able to do by just being there and trying to make all that stuff happen while I was out of town and there, physically in person, trying to make that happen. So this brings me to another point that I wanted to make, and that is that the theory is, and we use this a lot, and we say this a lot, that we will build our stands to pass in the hardest areas in the nation. Now, if we were to do what they asked me to do, where we removed the hand washing sink, we just put in a large basin, and that now somehow allowed me to pass, well, that stand would now not pass anywhere else in the nation. So that theory doesn't always hold true. Sometimes they just want you to do wacky things.
So I wanted to go through this and just communicate a few things. So on your shelves, every building, every stand, every kiosk, every cart, they're all built out of boat materials, which means that there's no rot. Everything is fiberglass, aluminum, and plastic. So you could literally go in, you can take it to a car wash, you can spray that whole thing out, and nothing will rot in that building. And a lot of times people will say, the health department will come in and they'll ask, okay, well, what is your largest piece of equipment? And people start saying the shaver and different things. They'll find stuff within the stand that they believe needs to be washed. The shaver does not need to fit in your sink. And even the blade housing, none of that stuff, no parts on the shaver need to fit in your sink. The sinks are built to be able to receive a 32-ounce serving bottle. And that is your equipment that then needs to be washed. It's your largest piece of equipment. And so make sure that you mention that to them. If they're asking your equipment, you can say, well, these are my bottles. This is what I need to wash in the utility sink. And that's all you need to do. Because sometimes people go overboard and then the health department right then will say, well, you don't have the ability to wash that in here. And they will not pass. So many times you need to be able to know how to answer that and what equipment to place before them. Going on to that, going on this, so we have NSF approved water storage. Now your stand, everything that is within this stand is NSF approved. The stand itself, and we've actually spoken with NSF quite a bit, and there's actually some other companies out there that claim that their whole stand, all of it is NSF approved. And the NSF people that we spoke with said you cannot do that. You can't NSF approve a whole stand. So the best that we were able to do after communicating with NSF quite a bit was to make sure that every piece of equipment within that stand is NSF approved. And anyway, and so you can see that happens here. So you have a very safe freshwater storage, and you have that at 15 gallons, I believe. You have your 3-basin sink. Down here you have your wastewater storage. That is 22 gallons. Normally with the health department, they'll want your wastewater to be 1/3 larger than your fresh. and usually they require a minimum for your fresh. Oftentimes that's 11 gallons. Sometimes it's 15. It all depends on where you are. So we went with a fairly large freshwater tank, and went with a much larger wastewater as well for your gray water. So wanted to point that out, and this is just another view of how those things work. You have a hot water heater. You have a water pump. Now your hot water heater, something that you can point out here is the hot water heater will actually heat the water that is currently in it even hotter. So a lot of times if I put in like really, really cold water, cold fresh water into my tank, then that hot water heater can only take it so hot. And it can actually get it pretty hot, but some will actually put it, most of them will fill it with their fingers. And almost every inspector I've had, even the one that I did at that other location, they just stuck their finger under it, they felt that it got hot, and they were done. If you do have somebody that is actually putting a thermometer on that water, then you'll want to be able to make that hot water get hotter for that first inspection. And the way that you do that is you actually add hot water into your freshwater tank, and then it will heat it again beyond that temperature. So that's the way that you're able to do those things. Otherwise, you'd have to put in a whole hot water heater, and that takes up more space. Everything about these is trying to accommodate the space that you have and making that work for you as much as possible. Okay, so I think I've touched on most of those. I want to be able to bring this up. Robbie actually brought up a question. He said sometimes they just ask about, do you have any sanitizer and where is it? I show them a jug. That usually works if they ask. Yeah, so it depends on where you are too. So if you're doing an event and there's actually some water by you, I'm actually surprised that they just said sanitizer. A lot of times you'll be able to get by with just a 5-gallon jug. Like if you look at our satellite car, all it has is a pump that you pump water onto your hands and use that for your hand wash. Now there's some events that you're able to do that. And for instance, like I do arenas quite a bit, and the arenas will actually, they're just fine with that. I've seen a lot of the people that are right by me, and they're literally just using a 5-gallon jug. They turn the 5-gallon jug on and wash their hands and turn it off, and they're golden. But at many events where you go into parks, and again, this is different for everyone, and Robbie, Robbie's in California, so I'm surprised that he made that comment, because that's the last place that I would expect they would say that. But here, if you go out into parks and things like that where you don't have other sinks, other restrooms that are readily available, you're at a 4th of July and the only bathrooms that are around are porta potties, well, you now have to have a more elaborate water system. And when you are a stationary location, then you really have to make sure that all of those things are in place. They can be, I mean, your event will vary quite a bit. There are some places where you could take that satellite cart, go in and do business, and there's other places where they're like, no way. You need to have hot water. You need to have at least 15 gallons of fresh water coming into this, not just 5. You need to have a 3-basin sink to be able to wash all of your equipment, and you need a separate hand washing sink.
So as you can tell, there's some different pieces to this webinar. We actually, on the original one, we started with Ustream, and the feed kept failing. So we went to GoToMeeting. That made for a better conversation, but we kept getting audio drops. So in the end, I recreated it, and I threw in some of the conversation that we had there at the end. And we did not get all of that audio either, so I recreated it to the best of my ability. From this point forward, I will probably pre-record most of the content, and then we'll open it up to questions. Trying to see the best way of doing that. I like actually having audible questions where you can actually hear the people asking questions, and I would like to go that route in the future. But mostly I just want to draw this webinar now to a close. Thank you very much for attending. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions, please shoot them to us, and And remember, we have a live chat feature on our website. We can answer questions like that. And we also have a forum. Go put those out there so that once the question is answered once, it's answered a million times for everybody else. Use those things, and we will talk to you soon. Appreciate your business and appreciate you watching. Thank you very much. Talk to you soon.